Okay, so we are now recording. So welcome all. This is our first meeting of the year. So we plan on having another one. I don't know how many of us maybe are joining us for the first time, or how many of us are sort of newcomers to the Ed Justice workshops. Could you raise your hand if you are? Okay, we got a few. Okay, yeah. Okay, so we have some that I know have been here before, and I know that some of us come to the workshops from different places, whether you heard of us online or you heard of us through the Bethlehem Area School District as well. We do want this to be an inclusive space. We do want this to be a space for all of us, but not all of us are necessarily from the same place. Actually, if you could put in the chat where you're from, that would be great, or where you're joining us from. While you're doing that, I just want to let you know who I am if you have never met me before. So my name is Dr. Marilisa Jiménez Garcia, and I am the founding director of the Institute on Critical Race and Ethnic Studies at Lehigh University, which is the logo right behind you. Right behind me, actually. I am also the chair of Ed Justice. And I'm joined today by a few of my colleagues from the Institute. So Alisa Flores, who's an undergraduate researcher, Paige Pagan, who is in a partnership with us through Social Justice Books, Dr. Mary Mitz-Darfer, who is joining us as a postdoctoral scholar, is here. And of course, with us today is future Dr. Illeana Jiménez, who we're ready to just make you part of our crew, Illeana. That's what we really want to do. Maybe that's part of the scheme too. Like, this is really a recruitment process that's happening. But I know there's a few of you too that I recognize from either the area or just other classes that we've had together. So I appreciate you being here. I see you, Carrie, as well. Welcome, welcome. So we're here to talk about a pretty important topic, I think. And one of the reasons I wanted to kind of start out by saying, so the series is Latinx Studies, right? Latinx Puerto Rican Studies in K through 12, which we started last year out of a real need and desire to emphasize the fact that a lot of our community members, a lot of our students of color are really students that are from these Caribbean Latinx communities, right? That are also students that identify as Afro-Latinx. And many times in our conversations about anti-racism and in terms of advocating for students of color, we might not really be as culturally relevant as we could be if we really take into consideration their backgrounds and who they are, especially Bethlehem, South Bethlehem, Allentown, Easton. We know that a lot of our kids are Dominican, a lot of our kids are Puerto Rican, and a lot of our kids are, especially in terms of Afro-Latinx. We also started out last year really with a theme about countering anti-Blackness in the Latinx community and also in our community as a whole, right? And being inclusive of Blackness, especially in our Latinx communities, and really thinking through, like, what does it mean for Black Lives Matter in the Latinx community, right? To make sure we're being inclusive of that. This year, not to say that that's not still the important thing, because we still have a very inclusive sort of pro-Black approach to the work that we're doing in Latinx studies. But something we really wanted to start thinking more deeply about is the issue of gender justice, the issue of misogyny in our communities. And a lot of this came out of the news stories over the summer in terms of Puerto Rican women and domestic partners that were being brutalized by their partners, right? There's a lot of this that happened in the news, a lot of really horrific stories, not that this is anything new. It was just that it seemed like in the summer, especially, there were just a lot of really intense conversations that were happening. And I really felt like, you know what, we really should talk about this. We really should have a workshop that's a little bit more in terms of the issue of gender justice. And in Latin America, we have a term called perspectiva de género. I don't know how many of you have heard that, perspectiva de género. So it's this idea of really thinking about gender, and obviously our LGBTQ plus community, our trans community. But one of the pillars of really understanding perspectiva de género is to make sure that we are not teaching male superiority, right? And this is actually something that's been very difficult in Latin America and the Caribbean for people to approve in the curriculum. So you can imagine a legacy of that in our, sort of like home nations and how that's going to be impacting our young people here. So I wanted to think about that in terms of our curriculum. How are we approaching gender justice? How are we approaching our communities of color, especially our Latinx kids, and thinking about things like toxic masculinity, and having, obviously productive conversations. These are sensitive topics, but how to do that. Obviously, Illeana, who's here today, is someone that I believe can really speak to this issue. So I'm really excited to have her here, and I'll be introducing her soon. Something I also wanted to point out before we start, and I don't know how many of you have heard about this issue in York, Pennsylvania, that there was a ban on anti-racist materials. How many of you have heard that story? Couple, right? Yeah, a couple of us. And also, I would also say Northampton, Pennsylvania is another place, which is the town actually, I think below us, is another place that had a book ban recently. So I think it's also really important for us who have also been taking a stand on anti-racism, right, to understand that there has been a backlash, even since the last year, where folks were like, hey, we got to do anti-racism. Now it's kind of like, well, wait a minute, right? There have been a lot of policies, and currently there's a lot of legislation on the floor to ban anti-racism and different kinds of materials, but also like these kind of conversations about critical race theory. Something I want to make sure we do as we continue to go forward is understanding really what these theories are and what they do. But one thing I want to say, as far as ICRES goes, as far as the Institute on Critical Race and Ethnic Studies, we do take a stand. We do take a stand. We do believe in anti-racism. We do believe in anti-sexism. We do believe in anti-colonialism. And we believe that there's no such thing as a neutral education, and that the best education is a truthful one. So I also encourage you to look out for resources. I know, Paulo Ferre, absolutely. And I know Paige is going to talk a little bit about social justice books, but I encourage you to find out more about the Teach Truth campaign. That's hashtag Teach Truth if you're interested in following it on social media. But something I also noted in the book ban, the recent one in York, is that there are a lot of those books. If you look at the list, and I can share this in the resources later when we get our email after the workshop, a lot of the books that were banned are very much about young women of color and young women protagonists of color, and very strong protagonists. And I just think that's a really interesting thing to think about, especially for us today in our workshop. What is it about a young female protagonist, a young woman of color, that is seemingly dangerous in some way in our classrooms, that seemingly is uncomfortable for folks to really center and to have as an empowerment, a symbol of empowerment? So I wanted to think about that and just ask those sort of opening questions with you. And let you understand that this is a space also that was organized by student activists. So the reason that we're here today is because our students organized for this space so that we could be here. So I want to make sure I give honor to our founders, always in our student activist founders, absolutely. And regardless of what you heard out there, we're the first Racial Justice Institute at Lehigh's campus. So thank you for being with us today and being part of our story. Our motto is research, teach, study, action. And action will always be something that we are interested in seeing coming out of research. So that's my opening. And I just wanted to make sure I also tell you, so we're gonna hear from a little bit from Paige Pagan, who's introducing some things from social justice books, some resources. And then we're gonna hear from Illeana Jiménez. And I'll introduce Illeana once Paige finishes her part. So thank you and welcome.
Thank you, Dr. Jimenez Garcia. So my name is Paige Pagan. I'm the program specialist at Social Justice Books, which is a project of Teaching for Change. For those of you who don't know, Teaching for Change is a nonprofit organization We're dedicated to providing predominantly educators and parents with the tools and resources needed to transform schools and provide every student, helping pave the way to provide every student with an inclusive, equitable, and diverse education. So social justice book specifically is dedicated to vetting and promoting certain children's and young adult titles that center social and racial justice. I've been working on curating and expanding our more than 80 book lists, and producing critical reviews of selected upcoming titles. So I'm so excited to be here at this very important talk. I've put together, I think, about 5 book lists that I think pertains to, the topic of Black and Latina feminisms. And I think hopefully it'll work if I drop it in the chat. Oh, okay. So the links will go out afterwards, I think. But these book lists can be found on the Social Justice Books website. So I have gender identity, on women's history and women's lives, on race and education, on Latinx and Afro-Latinx. So I think that hopefully you would find at least one resource within these book lists that will serve you well. And yeah, I'm just excited to be here, and I'm also here for any questions on resources if you have any. So that's all for me. Thank you.
Okay, I was just dropping into the chat the link to socialjusticebooks.org, where folks can also go and look at multiple titles, but we certainly encourage you to go and look at the ones that Paige was recommending. And there is an email that always goes out after our workshop where we remind you of all the different things that we shared, including this video. So be on the lookout for that afterward. So today's workshop is titled Teaching Black and Latina Feminisms in High School. And it is just such an honor for me. Let me just fangirl to introduce Illeana Jiménez, who is also future Dr. Illeana Jiménez, because she's doing her doctoral work right now at Teachers College. But Illeana Jiménez is a leading critical feminist teacher activist and creator of @Feminist Teacher. That's how I found Illeana. Back in the day, not too far back in the day, but sort of following her as feminist teacher on Twitter, and the hashtag HS Feminism and K-12 or K-12 feminism hashtags. As a queer Latina feminist educator, she has taught high school and graduate students women of color feminisms, critical feminist pedagogies, curriculum, and activism for the last 25 years. So we got some experience in this house, okay? Her doctoral research in English education at Teachers College, Columbia University, focuses on Black and Latina feminisms in schools, as well as digital and school-based feminist activisms. In 2011, she received the Distinguished Fulbright to interview queer youth in Mexico City on identity, relationships, and harassment. Globally, she has presented workshops for teachers on intersectional feminist and queer pedagogies in Argentina, Australia, Greece, India, Mexico, and the UK. She has also published in Gender and Education in an Era of Post-Truth Populism, Struggles, Challenges, and Strategies, Radical Teacher, Meridians, the Feminist Utopia Project, and Youth Sexualities, Public Feelings, and Contemporary Cultural Politics. She received her BA in English Literature at Smith and her MA in English Literature at Middlebury College. So welcome, Illeana Jiménez.
There's nothing more beautiful or powerful than to be introduced by Doctora Jiménez Garcia. I feel like, wow, that's such an honor to almost, I'm like looking at myself when I hear you introducing me. It's like I feel like I'm looking at in the mirror, and that is so rare when we're in the academies. And my mother is here, Nidia Jiménez. She's there. She's probably going to be behind the camera, but I feel like she's holding a space for us here too. I love the idea of being recruited, so I'm down with that. I'm completely on board with that if that needs to happen. My mom, by the way, is one of the founding secretaries of the Puerto Rican Studies Department at John Jay back in the day in the 70s when it was located on Park Avenue South. My parents met at John Jay College of Criminal Justice. So exactly, Boricua, all of it. I know a number of you are originally from the Bronx. I was born in Manhattan, grew up in the Bronx, Long Island, public schools. Smith was, my real first, I'm first gen. My parents didn't go to college. So much of what I'm going to talk about right now is really the legacy of having of this first gen experience of doing feminist work in schools. And it comes very much from my identity. So I'm going to share my screen. We practiced this earlier, share a sound. Here we go. So I think what I'm going to do, rather than having you all look at my tabs, because I know that's very exciting, I am going to make this just a little bit bigger. Is that okay if I do that? Can everybody see when I make the screen just a little bit bigger for everybody to see? Really what I'm going to try and do is highlight the work. I'm entering my 25th year of teaching. I started teaching when I was 22, straight out of my college years. And really what I'm about to share with you is the work that started when I first graduated from Smith, and I went straight into teaching in girls' schools. And these were very wealthy, white, privileged girls' schools in the Baltimore and DC areas. And as not only as a first-gen graduate, but a first-gen teacher, going into these spaces that I didn't really know much about. I didn't really know what it meant to teach in private schools, because I had gone to public school all of my life, and my experience at Smith was one of, although at times it had alienating aspects, it was also a space in which I could find my identity as a queer Latina feminist in her early 20s. And so I thought that teaching in girls' schools was going to be like Smith mini me, but it was actually not that. It was actually it was a rude awakening. I had to close my door a lot because the girls' schools were not interested in intersectional feminism. They were not interested in women of color feminisms. They were interested in a white feminist corporate feminism that I did not subscribe to and still do not subscribe to. They were interested in feminism as a form of acquiring wealth and power and status and achievement. And that is not the feminism that I'm interested in. And so, going into these spaces was about creating interventions on various levels of what it means to teach in girls' schools, white girls' schools, predominantly white girls' schools, and spaces where feminism had certain assumptions that were frankly racist and classist and settler colonialist in so many ways. So now I've been teaching at the same school for the last 18 years, a small downtown school in New York City, and I'm also a fourth year doctoral student at Teachers College in the English Ed program. And, starting at 43 and now I'm 46, it's been a trajectory into really beginning to articulate what does it mean to do critical feminist pedagogies? And I could talk about so many different things, but the way that I conceptualize high school feminism is as curriculum and activism, as a national and global movement, and as teacher education. I'm going to focus today's talk mainly on curriculum and activism in the classroom, and in particular highlighting the ways in which the young, not only students of color, but boys of color, trans boys of color, trans femmes of color, engage with feminisms in the classroom. So I just want to give you a little bit of a portrait of the kinds of classes I've taught over the years. I'm going to highlight the intersectional feminism class. I also teach a queer literature class. I have now transformed that into a queer love stories class. I have taught Latinx literature, memoir writing. I have a class on Toni Morrison, focusing only on Beloved. And back in the day when I used to teach 10th grade, I was focused on American literature and would balance that out with teaching all these other electives. So I just want to give you a portrait of the fact that I'm speaking to you really as a high school English teacher. And this is just, again, just some snapshots of some of the students who have taken my feminism class over the years. I want you to get a sense of who you're looking at, who I'm talking about, a range of racial identities, gender identities, socioeconomic class identities, even though they're all in a private school. They're coming in from all parts of New York City, New Jersey, the subway. So they're all converging in this downtown space in Manhattan, and bringing all their varying positionalities. So I'm going to talk about the curriculum itself. It really is a women of color feminisms class, and the course is offered to high school juniors and seniors. It's an elective, and I really focus on feminist genealogies, women of color feminist genealogies, drawing back from Sojourner Truth, and really giving the, it's only a semester, so I can only do so much from between September and December. So we start with early work, Sojourner Truth, Bell Hooks, Audre Lorde, the Combahee River Collective. Angela Davis went to the school where I teach. She graduated from there in 1961. She still credits the school as being a part of forming her early kind of communist socialist leanings. A lot of the teachers there had actually been a part of the Red Scare. So this is a school that has a really long history in progressive / leftist education, social justice education. I also bring in lots of theorists, Patricia Hill Collins, Kimberly Crenshaw. We look at the Anita Hill case. It's also the 30th anniversary of Anita Hill's testimony. Latina feminists, Gloria Anzaldúa, Shiri Moraga. I love Brittany Cooper at Rutgers. I think there's somebody in the room from Rutgers. Brittany Cooper is one of my favorite Black feminists ever. We look at poetry by Alexis Pauline Gumbs, Me Too activism by Aisha Shahida Simmons on sexual kind of violence within families. And then also, of course, Black Lives Matter activists Elisa Garza, Opal Tometi, Patrice Concolor. So this is just a portrait of some of the work that we are looking at. This year's text in the course, this is exactly what I'm doing in the class with my high school students. Sister Outsider, How We Get Free, Black Feminism in the Combahee River Collective, which includes a Black feminist statement and interviews with the original founders of the Combahee River Collective, as well as Black Lives Matter activists. And then a new memoir by Charlene Carruthers, Unapologetic, a Black, Queer, and Feminist Mandate for Radical Movements. So just to kind of summarize where I'm coming from in the kind of politic of this class, which is that it's intersectional, it's interdisciplinary. I'm a high school English teacher coming from not only literature, but I also bring in history. I bring in art history, media, activism, politics, sociology, legal theory, all of these things. I want them to have a sense of where we can bring that feminist lens from different angles. It's intergenerational. I'm 46, and throughout the, whatever 25 years of doing this work and the last 13 years of teaching this particular class, I've had such a range of speakers come in from a range of ages. I want my students to know that I'm not the only kind of critical feminist they're going to meet. I situate this within a local, national, and global movement of feminist teachers, critical feminist teachers. It's multi-issue. We focus on digital activism as a way to get our work out into the world. And I'll share a little bit of that later. And I really believe in school-based activism, which is how do we bring a critical lens to the actual schools that we're in, which can be very dangerous. A lot of schools don't want to be looked at critically from within. They want the critique to somehow go outwards. And sometimes the critique has to happen from within to dismantle these systems. So that always happens in these like forms of public pedagogies. When I first started teaching the class, and back in the fall of 2008, many students didn't know the word intersectionality. They were, the fall of 2008 was the Obama election cycle. Many students had never heard of the word, and it took us several years for social media to kind of pick it up as a hashtag. And now there hasn't gone maybe the last 8 or 9 years that I've taught the class, students immediately know what I'm talking about, but they don't know the genealogies. They don't know how, how and where it was coined. They don't know the history. They don't know Black feminist history in particular. So that's what I think is our obligation and duty to do in schools, is to bring them that work. And of course, with Black Lives Matter and Say Her Name protests, activism, all of this has been an influence on the shape of the course. So I'm just going to do a really quick introduction to intersectionality, because I keep mentioning it and I know not everybody knows what it is. Maybe you've heard of it in your own social media feed. I'm just going to give a little quick overview, which is that it's a critical social theory that holds that forms of oppression interrelate, creating a system of oppression that reflects the intersection of multiple forms of discrimination. And Kimberly Crenshaw, who is actually a critical legal professor, right? She's a law professor. And when she conceptualized this, when she coined this term, she did it in two essays or two articles, one from 1989 and the other one from 1991, demarginalizing the intersection of race and sex, and the other one, mapping the margins. These two pieces together helped her to coin this term. And what she was really doing was creating an intervention on critical legal studies, which was really only looking at class. And she was saying, we need to look at race and gender together. And Brittany Cooper, Black feminist scholar, she really clearly says that intersectionality created a major shift in feminist theorizing as an account of power. Intersectionality attends to the particular forms of subjugation and subordination that characterizes Black women's intersecting and multiplicative experiences of racism and sexism within the law. And this is the major intervention that Crenshaw did, and this is what gets lost in the social media hashtags. This is what also gets lost in so-called DEI initiatives, right? There's a whitewashing, gender washing, race washing of what intersectionality really draws from and tries to intervene on. We did get to hear Kimberly Crenshaw speak a couple of years ago this is that year's feminism class. We got on the subway, went to go hear her speak at Columbia. And then one of the most powerful things she said was that when she was at Harvard Law School, during those 3 years, she said, we were engaging in debates with our faculty over what the role of race and gender in class and the curriculum should be. So even Kimberly Crenshaw was interested in curriculum. When she was at Harvard Law School, she was trying to create a conversation around what they were learning at Harvard around race and gender and class. So she was already doing that work as a student. So quickly on feminist theory as feminist pedagogy, Bell Hooks says feminism is a struggle to end sexist oppression, therefore is necessarily a struggle to eradicate the ideology of domination that permeates Western culture on various levels, as well as a commitment to reorganizing society so that the self-development of people can take precedence over imperialism, economic expansion, and material desires. Okay, so this is my starting point for talking about feminism with my students. I will say to them on day 1, 2, and 3, what are your definitions of feminism? And they will, what are your associations? Why are you taking this class? And then I give them this definition and I say, let's really break this down. What are words that surprise you? What are words that you wouldn't have associated with feminist thought or action? And they usually will lift up words like imperialism, economic expansion, material desires, even words like domination, reorganizing society. Often they'll walk in with definitions such as feminism is equality between men and women. And I make an intervention on that really quickly and provide them with much more layered, nuanced, complex definitions that come from a much more intersectional dismantling of systems perspective. And once they see this definition, they really begin to see, oh, this is much larger than we imagined. And that it allows them, it gives them a framework to begin thinking about how things like imperialism, economic expansion, and material desires, and capitalism, and white supremacist, capitalist patriarchy, as bell hooks would say, is a part of their everyday existence, and they bring that lens. So what is feminist pedagogy? Hooks says that her pedagogical practices have emerged from the mutually illuminating interplay of anti-colonial, critical, and feminist pedagogies. And she's interested in interrogating biases in curricula. So I was so interested in the lists that were provided in the chat. Those are the kind of resources that are great for doing this, that reinscribe systems of domination, such as racism and sexism. Like, what are the ways in which we're living in systems of domination every single day? And they begin to unpack that in the class. A really core part of this that I think gets overlooked is that critical feminist pedagogy, engaged pedagogies from women of color feminist perspectives, really is about self-actualization, like the process of doing internal work on yourself, not only in the course but also beyond. And how does the space of the classroom become a space of looking at your internal life? And bell hooks writes, not surprisingly, teachers who are not concerned with inner well-being are the most threatened by the demand on the part of students for liberatory education, for pedagogical processes that will aid them in their own struggle towards self-actualization. So if you're not doing this part in your classroom, then you're not actually doing the part that's going to allow students to do critical work in the external world, because you have to be able to do this internal work on yourself so that you can engage with the dismantling work externally. And Angela Davis, I love this quote. She said this at the Women's Studies Conference, I think in Puerto Rico. I can't remember exactly. It was either 2013 or 14, but she said, intersectionality is the most productive form of feminism, mic drop. I feel like this is it, right? So what are the ways in which, she doesn't mean productive in terms of capitalism. She means productive in terms of dismantling, in terms of radicalism, in terms of criticality, in terms of what are the ways in which this brings this multiplicative forces that Brittany Cooper was talking about earlier. Okay, so I give them the bell hooks definition. I also give them a definition that Barbara Smith wrote in 1979, feminism is a political theory and practice that struggles to free all women, women of color, working class women, poor women, disabled women, Jewish women, lesbians, old women, as well as white, economically privileged heterosexual women. Anything less than this vision of total freedom is not feminism, but merely female self-aggrandizement. What I was saying earlier about white feminist corporate, perspectives is this part about self-aggrandizement, right? The capitulating yourself to the top of the CEO line, and that's feminist. I'm not interested in that, and neither is Barbara Smith. And what my students will do is they'll say, okay, this is a definition from 1979. Can we talk about Muslim women? Can we talk about trans people, non-binary people? They will make their own interventions on these definitions as well. Okay, so let's go a little bit deeper with Barbara Smith. So she came to my classroom back in the days of Skype. I feel like when I say Skype, I'm saying phonograph or like CD, because it seems like so long ago that we were on Skype. But I was able to get connected to her through other activists. And I said, she needs to come to my classroom because we read the Combahee River Collective's Black Feminist Statement every single year, and I would love for her to come. And she came in through Skype, and my students literally would go up to the screen and talk to her and ask her questions. And then that fall, which was the 40th anniversary of the Black Feminist Statement in 2017, we were able to hear her speak on a panel about the anniversary of the Black Feminist Statement, and she had to leave early. So have you ever been in an event and one of the speakers leaves early and you're like, I came for you. So what we did was we I said to my students who were sitting in the front row, I said, we are getting up right now and leaving and like chasing her in the lobby. And we found her and I said, hello, you met us on Skype back in September, October. And she was so thrilled to meet us in person. Look at their face, look at my students' faces. They're so thrilled to meet her. And, you know, she was just pivotal in allowing them to understand that the Black feminist statement is not some static document, but one that they could apply to their own lives. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about how that worked out. I'm going to talk about Christian and Destiny, who are two students who are sitting, I don't know if you can see my little cursor, but I'm going to talk about Christian and Destiny and some of their writing that they did. This is Christian over here. We went to an event at the UN. I'm going to lift up some of their writing. Later on, I'm also going to lift up some of Darielle's writing. Okay. So Destiny wrote in reflection about meeting Barbara Smith on Skype. When we actually spoke to Barbara Smith, I asked her how we can explain Black feminism to Black men who believe it divides the movement. This is because oftentimes race takes precedence over gender, though the two are not separate. Her response was along the lines of the fact that we cannot have liberation for only part of a community and not all of it, which I thought was really important. This is at that time, she was a senior in high school. Like this is her moment to ask Barbara Smith, why do Black men or not all Black men care about Black feminism? And you know, to be able to speak to Barbara Smith as a high school student and to engage her in a conversation. And she goes on in her reflection, one of the most significant quotes of the Combahee River Collective is as follows: the reaction of Black men to feminism has been notoriously negative. They realize that they may also be forced to change their habitually sexist ways of interacting with and oppressing Black women. Though this isn't the first time I've seen this perspective, Destiny writes, it is the first time I've seen it articulated so clearly. So for her, reading the Black feminist statement, which was written in 1977, and she's reading it 40 years later in 2017, I resonate with this document, with this statement 40 years later as a high school kid. And, you know, she's having this conversation and Barbara Smith tells her the story about how the reason why the Combahee River Collective was formed was because they felt alienated. Black feminist lesbians, these were Black feminist lesbians, were alienated from the civil rights movement because it was largely led by Black men at the forefront, but Black women were doing all the emotional, political, intellectual labor and behind the scenes. And then they were going into these white feminist movement spaces where white women were only centering gender. And there were also kind of privileged spaces as well. So they weren't looking at class. But they said, you know what, we're going to create the Combahee River Collective where we actually get to do the work of early, you know, they were doing, if you read even just the first paragraph of the Black feminist statement is where intersectionality is laid out for you. They're talking about interlocking oppressions in that first paragraph. So how does Christian respond? He says, meeting Barbara Smith was a very eye-opening experience for me. The most impressive feat of feminism, in my opinion, was its ability to not only stay relevant for the past 40 years since 1977, but also remain unchanged. Although, you know, obviously it has changed, but from his high school perspective, in terms of the message and goal of feminism, I learned that Black women had their own political agenda and feminism was the way to express it. That the natural enemy of feminism is capitalism. Hello, this is why we need to teach students how to engage in the capitalist critique, because now he understands how to draw from the Black feminist statement and understand that what Bell Hooks was talking about, imperialism, economic expansion, material desires, this is his synthesis. He's saying because the system in America encourages women to be prone. So that word prone was a word that Barbara Smith used when she visited. She said, Black women were expected to be on our backs, prone, not only prone politically, like your issues of being women and queer and lesbian, et cetera, but also prone sexually, right? She was talking about availability as sexual objects. And so Barbara Smith was very honest with my students. She said, it encourages women to be prone rather than taking an equal and active role. So he goes on to say, more than anything, listening to Barbara Smith, who's in the same age group as my Guyanese grandmother, makes me feel proud to be Black. When it comes to supporting feminism, I realized that women face far more adversity than men and should be respected for their accomplishments. My goal for this course is to figure out a way to include my friends. So here's a action step for Christian. Other than the fact that we have mothers and sisters, it should be more like we need to support people of color who are fighting the same battles. I look forward to telling my friends that feminism is all inclusive. This is probably the biggest misconception I had to clear up with the young men of color at my school. So this is when Christian was a senior. I'm going to show you a little video of students from 2013. This video went a little bit viral when it was released. So I'm going to play it a little bit. I probably won't play the second video, but maybe during the discussion, I can play the second video. And by the way, one of the things that I realized about this video when they made it was that it actually allowed me to see how that year's students were understanding intersectionality. And it was, in my opinion, I don't think that they're explaining intersectionality the way that I thought that I taught it. So when this video was released, I realized, wow, I really need to make an intervention on my own pedagogy and to be more clear that intersectionality is about looking at interlocking systems. And my students wind up saying that it's about equality, which is not quite what intersectionality is pointing to. So you'll probably catch that mistake.
A feminist is anyone who wants equality because they or a different group of people are being subjugated because of who they are.
My name is Brooke Abraha. I'm a senior at LREI, and I am a feminist.
I'm Russell. I'm 18. I'm in 12th grade.
I'm Max Freed. I'm in 12th grade. I'm 18.
My name is Noel Diggs. I'm a senior in high school.
My name is Cesar Sublencia. I'm in 12th grade.
I'm Nathaniel McGlure. I'm in 12th grade.
My name is Luis Rojas. I'm 16.
My name is Emmett Stagg. I'm 17 years old. I'm in 12th grade, and I'm a feminist.
I'm a feminist.
And I am a feminist.
I'm a feminist.
I'm a feminist.
What were your reasons for taking the feminism class?
Feminism, the class kind of appealed to me, the curriculum, and the reason I joined was because I kind of wanted to know what feminism meant.
My reason for taking the feminism course is that, especially in high school, there's not opportunities like this that come around ever.
My sister attends Lehman College, and over there she was taking a feminism course, women's studies course, and she just seemed to really enjoy it. It was very new. I had never heard of women's studies prior to LREI.
What was your definition of feminism before taking the class?
I didn't have a concrete definition of feminism before the class. I knew it wasn't really the perceived idea to the majority, which is that like feminism is all women and like a total hatred towards men.
My definition of feminism was any woman who wanted equality between the sexes.
One of the biggest concepts we learned in the class was this idea of intersectionality. Intersectionality is the idea that feminism goes beyond just the equality for women. It's equality between races, gender, class, sexual orientation, and so forth.
At one point we wrote intersectionality essay. That taught me that nothing is really one-dimensional. Like you can't just be black, you can be black and gay, or like black, gay, disabled. There are many different things, and that don't relate to the master narrative set in place by America. So that, I would say that is the most important thing that I learned, was that nothing is just one-dimensional.
We've been doing a lot. I know we just moved into trafficking, sex trafficking, and amongst girls and amongst really any age of children. And then before that, we were doing things like harassment and acid attacks, which was pretty brutal.
What impact did the class have on you?
Feminism opened my eyes to just so much in the world. There are a lot of things that I just didn't know about until I came to feminism, and it really just shocked me.
How do you see the world differently now?
Oh, just every time that you read a magazine, every time that you listen to a song, you can hear the misogynistic undertones.
And I've now changed, I've been able to change my silence into action. If I see something I don't like, I'm not afraid to speak up, and I'll address that.
So a little bit after the class, me and Illeana teamed up again. We spoke at a conference for AAUW against the sexual harassment of students at school.
I would encourage a friend or a peer in joining the feminist movement because once again, it really does embody more than just equal rights for women, or it embodies more than just benefiting only women. It can help us all.
I really try to tell them that it is a life-changing course. It'll test who you are as a person. It'll really impact you.
My definition would now be equality for all genders, but also for other oppressed groups.
My definition of feminism is anyone that believes in equality of any sort, whether it be gender, race, sexuality, that is what a feminist is. A feminist is not one-dimensional.
What do you see as the future of feminism?
Us. We're the future of feminism right now. That's why we have to keep the ball rolling. And I was asked a while ago if, as women, like, are they good? Or as feminists, are we good where we stand? And a lot of people said yes, and I say no. There's still more work to be done.
All right, so I will skip over the next video and maybe share that later. There have been various boys who have taken the class over the years, and so that was 2013. In 2018, the boys who took that class, which there's a shot of them here and alongside the girls who also took the class, every year there's an assembly that is a part of the requirement of the class. So I have the students move into a public pedagogical space of the assembly, and they create the script, they create the content. And the boys really wanted to do their section on the ways in which they were engaging in violent, misogynistic, sexist texting with each other to talk about their peers, to talk about girls while they were texting. So what they did was they kind of they recreated the kinds of language that they used in these texts with each other up on the screen. And they said they basically called on their peers, we need to stop doing this because we're perpetuating violence through these like text messages with each other about how we speak about our sexuality, we talk about desire, talk about violence. Like, basically, at the end of the day, what we're doing is perpetuating sexual violence. I want to give a few more examples of trans activism, and in particular Afro-Latinx trans activism. Darielle, who I had mentioned earlier, had also met Barbara Smith, and she wrote, I agree with the statement, the Black feminist statement, and would revise it to say, if Black trans women were free, it would mean that everyone else would have to be free. I believe that this is how we will bring visibility to the ways in which Black and brown trans women are one, if not the most marginalized of communities. I know that Barbara Smith, who is one of the originators of the statement, would agree with my revision because when she visited our class via Skype, she said, my feminism was always about expanding. We respected justice for all and continued to speak on how the women she has worked with embrace trans rights and visibility. So then Darielle was a senior at the time and essentially got up on stage and had done a whole historical research and contemporary research on Black and Latinx and Afro-Latinx activists and showed her slides up on the stage, and then created the intervention on the Black feminist statement in a separate slide in which she said, if Black trans women were free, it would mean that everyone would have to be free. Darielle is now a senior in college and is still doing this work of drawing from Black and Latina feminisms from an Afro-Latinx trans perspective. Just want to say quickly that other pedagogical spaces, such as the last in-person assembly that we had, which was in 2019, the students, another trans student got up and talked about the ways in which the class had helped him to really begin to examine their own experience of having been assaulted. The school wound up actually censoring this section of the script because they didn't want him as a trans student to get up and say that he had been raped. And the student essentially pushed back and said, no, I'm going to tell. It wasn't that he told his story. It was more that he just wanted to say, this class gave me the space in order to even just say my own truth. And he wound up saying it up on that stage. And we're in a section about kind of Tarana Burke and Me Too, and giving kind of Black feminist genealogies to the Me Too movement. During pandemic, we, instead of doing an assembly, we created a podcast, which I will share the link in the chat after this is done. But I do encourage you to listen to the podcast. It's an hour long. And the best part of the podcast is that you will get to hear my students' voices directly and their own experience of being in the class. They also talk about a range of issues, including boys and masculinities. They talk about non-binary identities. They talk about the ways in which learning feminism during pandemic is absolutely crucial for them as high school students. So I'll put it in the chat later. And then this is this year's class. It's the first in-person class since 2019. There are 5 boys in the class, 4 cisgender boys, 1 trans boy, 5 students of color, including 2 boys of color. And I just want to end with Ronaldo, who I can't even read the quote here, but he's basically saying that he's taking the class because he has been following these various feminist influencers on social media. And he says, the way feminism matters today is very remarkable. Due to social media, we have become even more aware of feminism and women's issues than we were before. We have to support women and femme-presenting people who are strong enough to share their stories with the world. I also think that so much of the feminism we are doing should be focused on women of color. One of the reasons I took this class is that I took your love stories class and I loved it. So the queer love stories class is another space that a lot of this critical work is happening. And this is where, for the teachers in the room, we can't just silo the work, critical feminist work or any kind of critical pedagogy to one class. It has to be our entire identity and politic that we bring to all of our teaching and beyond. It really allowed me to be vulnerable. So this is one of the reasons why he's taking the class, because he's engaging in the emotional work, the self-actualization work as a young queer Latinx boy. And it was one of the most meaningful classes I've ever taken. So of course, I imagine this class will be the same. I also think that coming from a Latino family, machismo is very prominent. So he wants to be able to dismantle his ideas about this in the class as well. And there's Audre Lorde on the table. This is the end, but not the end of the conversation. I hope that it opens up all kinds of conversations now, questions, and unpacking together so that we can keep fighting the good fight.
Thank you so much, Illeana, for that was a lot. I mean, I was taking so many notes, even things that I learned years ago that I hadn't been thinking about, and even some stuff that came up today in our class that I teach a class on Afro-Latinas, and it's sort of like the solidarities between the different collectives, right? And I did put in the chat also the Black Latinos No Collective statement, because it reminded me of some of the things you were talking about also with the statement. Anyhow, I just thank you so much. And yeah, no, this space has already been open with a lot of different topics and different things. Also, I love that you shared student work. So I have some questions, but I want to, hold back before saying anything, and let's see what our audience has to say, and some of the teachers that are here also who have questions. What questions do you have for Illeana? And feel free to, unmute. Obviously, this is an uplifting, affirming space, and we want to have a productive, positive conversation. Productive. I love that you said it's not about capitalism, though. Not that kind of productive. So what questions do we have?
I wanted to ask, you had mentioned that from the video, the boys seemed to have not the ideal definition of feminism and the true definition of feminism you were working to put forward. What was a change you made to progress in that space?
I love that question. So there's a moment there where Noelle says intersectionality is the idea that it's not only equality between gender, but equality between race. And I thought, oh no, that's not what I said. But it actually allowed me, because I had nothing to do with the video. I said this was the first time the class that year, that fall of 2013 was the first time the class had ever had 6 boys in it. And so I said to the boys, look, I said to Noelle really, because he was the kind of the lead on this project. I said, I would love for the 6 of you to create a video about your experience in the class, because this is historic. I've never had 6 boys. I've always had boys in the class, but never 6. And also because the majority of those 6 were boys of color. And there was also 1 trans boy. And so I said, I would love it if you all got together and make a video about your experience in the class, but I don't want anything to do with it. I don't want to influence what you're going to say. I don't want you to feel like you're going to be graded, because it wasn't a graded project. It was completely independent. And so they apparently they have like hours of footage, which I've never seen. And they put all of this together. And when I saw the video and heard Noelle say that that intersectionality was about equality, I was like, that's not quite right. What I really want them to understand that it's about these interlocking systems of oppression and power, and what Brittany Cooper lays out as that these are like, because race and gender are not accounted for in the law, Crenshaw was trying to account for this for these legal structures. Essentially, it's a systemic theory. It's not an identity theory. It's not a totalizing theory about identity. And so I then said, okay, I clearly need to make this much more, I need to clarify my own teaching. So I wound up bringing in other texts. I slowed down the way we read the Black Feminist Statement. I slowed down our reading of Crenshaw. I tried to be very clear about how they were going to write their own intersectionality essays. So really it was an exercise in slowing down and looking carefully at language and allowing them to unpack it together and to really begin to, like when we read like Master's Tools or not, We'll Never Dismantle the Master's House, I would say, what are these tools, right? And so, and how are these tools a part of the systems? And how are these systems a part of what Crenshaw is talking about? So like I would try to really kind of read across the texts and say, how can we bring like an intersectional feminist reading of these texts? So it really changed my pedagogy to make not only the theory clear, but really like the mission of the class clearer.
Other questions that we have?
I just have a comment. Hi, thank you so much for spending time with us. I work for the Bethlehem Area School District, and I see some teachers on here. Thank you for being here. I so appreciate how you own that. Like I've often been one who have said, well, they just didn't get it. I taught it, they didn't get it. And you went back and said, no, I did something that I didn't explain it well enough. So I need to go back and figure out where that was and how to reframe this so that they can get it. And you didn't say, you guys are just wrong. You didn't go there either. So what got you to that place with such a tough topic?
I mean, my whole mission is to engage in that productive work that Angela Davis is talking about. So when she uses the word radical, she says radical doesn't mean crazy. It means getting at the root. So if my teaching is not clear, if I'm not teaching these really difficult and complex theories in a clear way to high school students, I don't think that I'll be contributing to the work of getting at the root and dismantling these systems from the point of view of a teacher. Like, for example, the other day, one of my students said to me, taking this class makes me lose hope. How do you keep your hope? And I said, this is, if I'm doing this work with you every single day, this is how I'm creating my intervention. Like, I'm not working at a nonprofit, I'm working in a school. And so, you know, if I'm not doing my part the way that I, and not interrogating myself and not being self-reflexive, then I don't think I'm doing my part to contribute to a larger justice-oriented pedagogy that is going to, I hope, make impact beyond my classroom.
Thank you.
Question. Maris, doctora Zamora, ¿cómo estás?
Hi, bien. Hi, Marilisa. Sorry, I popped in. My partner was the one on the thing, but I was in the background listening.
This is the only way we could get you back to come to Lehigh, ¿verdad?
Yes, that would be so great.
Doctora
Thank you.
Zamora was in the Africana Studies program back in the day. We started out here together, so it's good to see you. It's good to see you. But let me let you ask a question though.
Yes, it's good to see you too. I hadn't signed up to come to the event because I was so busy. I was like, Williams shared it with me, and I was like, oh, I'll pop in if I can. But I happened to come back in from doing some work and got to hear a bit about the talk, and I thought it was really cool. And I kind of had a question. I guess maybe comment / question. You know, as someone who does, you know, Afro-Latina feminist work and theory, and also, you know, on the side work with young people. Sometimes, you know, I am glad that this work is being done in high school with young folks, right, as part of a curriculum. And so I want to definitely, you know, acknowledge that and say that that's amazing and that's awesome work that is being done. So thank you for that. And I also had a question about, like, where is the place for Afro-Latina feminist work, right, in these kind of curriculums? How do we teach our students, right, of that Afro-Latinas are here too, right, and not kind of reinscribe the monolithic that Blackness and Latinidad are mutually exclusive, right, and the Afro-Latinas have been doing the work as educators, as activists, right, and how to engage with that as they're thinking about Blackness and Latinidad and all of that. So I was curious to hear more of that, especially as you know, when I think of the Combahee River Collective, as much as I love the Combahee River Collective and the statement, right, and all of that, the reality is that the statement, right, and the collective has been taught as a flat, you know, just Black feminist collective statement that doesn't engage with Black Latinidad, right, or Black Latina womanhood, right, even though, yes, we can, as Black Latinas, we can connect, right, to some of those experiences, and we see ourselves, right, in those experiences as well, right, we know that we're not fully there either, right? So I'm wondering how you might engage that with in a curriculum like this, or how you might be thinking about having that conversation with students.
Yeah, so that was a lot of the and I couldn't really expand on it because of time, but that was a lot of the work that Dariel wound up bringing as an intervention to the class that year. And since then, I've been able to work with Dariel both in terms of, so she wound up doing a lot of research on, you know, Afro-Latinx trans activism and brought that history into the classroom. And then I wound up working with her, you know, speaking to teachers in various spaces and doing workshops with her together on that. So that she was the main student who actually had created that intervention back in fall of 2017. And since then, the ways in which other Afro-Latinx students have engaged with the class have been through that entryway that Dariel created as well. So the content has shifted to more inclusive voices and more voices of Afro-Latinx kind of positions and experiences based on Darielle's intervention. Do you have a course that you're teaching right now in Afro-Latinx feminisms?
I'm not teaching a course yet on Afro-Latinx feminisms, but I am in the process of completing my book on Afro-Latina feminist theory, based on my dissertation. And so it's funny because I wrote an article that came out early last year with a semi-ethnographical engaging Elizabeth Acevedo's The Poet X, and really talking about Black Latina girlhood, particularly around teenagehood. And it was one of those things where it's like, I feel like I have to write this piece because no one's really talking, right, to the specificities of, right, what is young Black Latina girlhood, right, and feminism, right, and those experiences of being a young teenage Black Latina girl, right, navigating the interstices of Blackness, Latinidad, right, of embodied experiences, right. So
would
I'm
you
writing
come
a
to
book.
my class and speak about your research?
Say that again?
Would you come to my class and speak about your research?
Sure, yeah, send me an email. I'll put my email on the chat and we can definitely continue a conversation. That would be dope.
I would love to have you come and talk about that.
Yeah, no, I'd love to.
Wow, that's amazing. You see how this happens? One thing I was gonna say too, and I don't know if you have a link to that article, Omaris, but I can try to find it when we have another question, because I've been putting some stuff in the chat too. I will say I also put the Black Latinas No collective statement there, just because it's one that I teach in my courses, that we look up, and we look up also the names of the scholars that are behind it, and sort of like, you know, thinking about like the different ways that also our young people, because there's a lot of them who are really like in that moment where they're like choosing, am I Africana studies or am I Latina studies? And that's been like a huge issue at Lehigh, even, and I think in our teacher ed programs too, right? Like there's a lot of kind of traditionalism that is we're still working with in terms of how we engage these different kinds of like bodies of scholarship, right? And I think that that's an important thing to bring out. So thanks for bringing that up. I'm gonna look for that article though, while maybe someone else has a question. I have another question too, but I want to leave room for other folks. It's more about like writing prompts and that kind of thing. Other questions that we have or comments? Somebody got it. Okay, good. Other comments for our questions for Illeana?
I just wanted to thank Illeana for your work. I think so much of growing up, and then also in my doctoral program, I had a lot of issues with women around me who would claim to be Marxist feminists, and I would be like, but I don't see space for myself, right? And it took a lot of looking in adulthood and seeking out like, what does it look like as a non-white centered feminism? And so I guess maybe this segues into a question about like, how do you begin to approach this work with young people? Like, what does day one in your classroom look like?
So day one is, I ask them a series of questions in which I say, what is your definition of feminism? What are your associations? What are your, and the associations can be negative, positive, in between. Why is feminism important today? And why are you taking this class? And then those initial questions are then asked through kind of like a series of free write prompts, and then they share them. And then the second day, I give them another prompt about gender. And I say, what are the ways in which you have been given certain messages about gender from family, from politics, from the media, from friendships, from school, from watching various spaces, various kinds of like their social media feed, for example. And then I asked them to write a story, a personal story about how they were given those messages. And inevitably what happens is the story, they can't tell the story without talking about race, without talking about class, without talking about sexuality, without talking about ethnicity, class, right? So in some ways, again, it's day 2, so they won't necessarily touch on all those things, but they wind up touching on gender and say race, gender and maybe religion, gender and class. And they begin to see that they can't actually extricate gender from some other category of identity. And that's how I begin to build their examination of gender. And then we deepen that with the rest of the readings of the course.
Amazing. Can I take your course?
Yes.
It's so good.
Absolutely.
I mean, one thing I think a lot of us come to these, development courses, but also wanting to see the spaces we wanted when we were younger, right? And wondering why it takes maybe college level before we ever get to see a writer that looks like us or sounds like us. And I know that that's part of the intervention we would like to see through the Institute, but obviously in partnership with other folks around the country. I'm gonna say the country, the globe, because it takes a system, right, to erase. It also takes a system to put us back in these places. And I think, one thing when in college courses, that's the one of the number one things I hear is, why did I have to take this class before I found this writer or before I found this? And so that intervention at that high school, middle school, and even younger, I would say, but obviously we struggle with public schooling. We struggle with being able to choose our curriculum, right? In many ways. So I'm wondering, I know that you teach at a private, institution. I'm wondering if you've noticed, like, what are some ways that you navigate when you were in the public system, for example, versus in the private system, in terms of like what you want to do and what you want to choose? Like, if you could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, one of the things that I do is I work a lot with teachers in different spaces. So there was this one initiative actually that Kimberly Crenshaw and others in New York City had started called the Young Women's Initiative. And it was kind of a coalition of mainly women of color, feminist organizations throughout the city. Crenshaw was a part of it. Joanne Smith from Girls for Gender Equity was a part of it. They put together this YWI group, and they said, we need to create curriculum for public schools in New York City. And we met for about a year, and there were different kind of subcommittees. There was a curriculum group, there was like a counseling group, there were different groups. And what they were trying to do is reimagine schools for Black girls in particular, but girls of color in general. And it was an initiative under the kind of a combination of the city council, the DOE, and we made all of these suggestions and recommendations to the DOE. And then what wound up happening was that I think they hired like this person who was supposed to oversee gender and curriculum in the DOE. I don't know whatever happened with it, but that's one initiative that I was a part of. And then I've also worked in spaces where kind of creating workshops through the National Women's, like there's another one that I'm doing with the National Women's Studies Association, where we are creating a day-long symposium for public school teachers across the country on Zoom to join us to look at women of color feminist pedagogy. So the way that I've engaged in the work with public school teachers is to create spaces where they don't exist. So how do we do teacher ed, for example? There's not a lot of teacher ed that's critical feminist. And so a lot of teacher ed is, if you look at education schools, they're not offering critical feminist pedagogy. They're not offering women of color feminism. They're not offering Black feminist theory. So that's what I've tried to do, is create spaces in women's studies conferences for teachers, create spaces even internationally. And I also have kind of networks of teachers who I work with who are trying to do this locally as well. But as far as my own experience, my entire career has been in independent schools. So that has been the ways in which I've also entered public schools schools when public school teachers will reach out to me and say, can I borrow your syllabus, or can I work with you, or can we collaborate in some way, or these larger committees like with the DOE.
Okay, yeah, we've had some conversations in the past with different experiences that teachers have had, and trying to maneuver the public system. We've had some success in this room. I know Faith, for example, is on this call. I saw her come in, and she's done a lot of different things in Phillipsburg, New Jersey, for example, getting syllabi approved, and a lot of work through comics, for example. I'd be interested in hearing more in the future, maybe not, just with Illeana, but like what we can do in our district, in terms of thinking about, these curriculum. And I know Doctora Vivian and I are always talking about how often curriculum is not part of the conversation. And it's really about, even trauma is something a lot of folks will talk about, but they won't talk about curriculum and the piece that curriculum plays in even the trauma-centered care, and even how you could be traumatizing students through curriculum that is really not culturally relevant, and I think that that's something to think about. One thing that really struck me was also in your presentation is like the trust that your students have with you, and the empowerment that they get from these courses, to the point where there was a student at the end that felt safe being able to tell the story, right, of trauma and of sexual trauma. And I was just wondering, clearly you're an amazing teacher, and that we can kind of see that through everything that you're doing and your intention and your purpose. But I was wondering, what would you say, I guess, to teachers who are thinking like, oh man, I wish I could build that trust with my students, or, what would you say is sort of like the essence of that kind of a relationship where trust is happening between student and teacher?
Yeah, I think you have to show absolute care every single day. You have to show, even now, one of the things I'm noticing from my students is that they'll say, you're the only teacher who's asking us how we're doing. And so, there might be other teachers who are asking, and what were these kind of emotional check-ins, but it has to be more than just performative. And it has to be more than, and it has to be at those really urgent moments where a student is about to be censored by the school. And I said to the student, if you decide to share your truth to the entire school, I will support you. And if you don't decide to say that, I will also support you. And I will also, I've had letters in my file, right? When you work in these schools, you're doing this work, you're gonna get in trouble. And I have certainly gotten into my fair share of trouble, and have gotten my fair share of letters and reprimands and time in the office, et cetera. So it's really about making a commitment to that care and showing it in the classroom every single day.
Yeah, excellent. I would also say by extension with our administrators who might be on this call, right? Like who are maybe sending teachers to do more work in anti-racism and these kinds of things, to make sure that we're backing up our teachers when certain things are happening, like these bans on resources, right, that we're seeing in states like Pennsylvania, which is where we are, states like Texas and Arizona and a lot of these different places where really there is a legislation. It hasn't formally happened, but it really is getting to be a situation where it could potentially be something they ban, to think about, how you're backing up your teachers who you are encouraging to do this work. How are you also, making that support happen and having that culture of care also for your teachers. And I just say that as, sort of can't get off this call without saying that for sure. What other questions do we have for Illeana before we go? We do have a couple minutes. And I just want to make sure we get our questions in if we have them. Or comments. Okay. Thank you for sharing. Yeah.
I can't imagine the healing that happens in your class, right?
Yeah,
so
that's
a
a
lot
whole
about trauma,
conversation too.
healing.
Yeah, that's a whole conversation too. One of the pieces that we look at is Audre Lorde's uses of the erotic. And one of the things that they begin to realize about that essay is that what she's really talking about is living from such a place of emotional spirit that it's actually a life of healing, that the erotic is essentially about living a healed life or a healing life. And they really start to get that as we unpack it. But yeah, I would like to think that it is a space of healing, or at least that it initiates a journey of it.
Yeah, amazing. And I think that's the promise of these kinds of this kind of education, right? And especially for young people of color who have so often been erased from these classrooms, you know, in different ways that we can also be more inclusive, even in our own pedagogies as we're doing, you know, that work and constantly. I love what you were saying about, you know, obviously the critical feminist pedagogy itself is self-actualization. It's a constant introspection. And that it's not just something we can kind of like tag on, you know, it really is a perspective we bring to everything that we do. And I think that's something to think about, right? When we're trying to plan lessons and that kind of thing, that it's not just like, well, there's a unit on, we have a unit on feminism, or we have a unit on race, but to really consider the perspective as a whole, which is what we bring to our classrooms. So thank you so much. I can just tell, I mean, before we even got on the call, we were chatting, all of us, and it was sort of like we were just needing this space in many ways at this point in the semester, and after in-person teaching and so many different things that have gone on. So I just thank you from the bottom of my heart for providing that sense. And thank you also for feeling welcome and sharing your story with us. We want to be that kind of space too, for sure. So thank you for taking the time to learn or learn with us. I was going to say, do you have any maybe final things that you would like to say, or things that you would like to make sure we look at before we get off, whether it's your website or anything in particular?
I was going to share the podcast that was made last year during pandemic. And this way you get to kind of hear at least the voices from last year. So I put that into the chat, and it's not only Spotify where you can hear that. I think there's other platforms like Apple, etc. But like I said earlier, you know, one of the things that I really welcome is collaboration and guest speakers. And now that we have Zoom, not Skype, we can all visit each other's classrooms in so many different ways. So I welcome anyone to that space, to my space, to your space. So I really was so honored by this invitation. Thank you, Dr. Jiménez, Doctora Jiménez. I love being able to say that to you.
Yes, yes. And I love saying future Doctora Jiménez. So lots of Jiménez's in this room right now. Looking at your mom's name also, so honored that she could join us as well. Well, I'm going to stop the recording, and then, you know, we can just